Hello, this is Anthony Fell, the pastor of the Refuge in Big Sandy, Texas, and this is a moment of refuge. I want to share with you today from Psalms 34, verse 3. It says, "Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together." I want to also share from Psalms 70, verse 4. It says, "Let all those that seek you rejoice and be glad in you, and let such as love your salvation say continually, let God be magnified." I want to talk to you about magnifying God. Now, just look at the term magnify. When you think about that term, it means to make big. Like we use magnifying glasses to maybe enlarge something to be able to read or see it better, anything along that lines. We need to learn to control our thinking and judge our thinking and operate in the thought process of magnifying God. In fact, your faith will only be as big as you make God to be. Let me give you a couple of examples that kind of compare to each other on magnifying God, or actually not magnifying God and magnifying your situations. One of them is in Numbers, where the 12 spies went out to look out the land that God had promised them and bring back a report. Of course, 10 of them brought back what the Bible referenced as an evil report. And then the two, Joshua and Caleb, who were of a different spirit, said, "We're well able to take the land. It is everything God said it would be, and we're well able to do it." But their report came back to them, and they made this statement, and there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. As you know, because of the report of these spies, they magnified the inhabitants of the land more than they magnified God. And for that reason, that whole generation did not get to enter in to what God had for them, what God had prepared for them, and what God had promised them. But the two that magnified God, they were able to lead the next generation into the land. Another good example of that is in 1 Samuel, when the Philistines were coming up against Israel, and King Saul and his army were all sitting out there. And many of y'all know Goliath came out every day and challenged them. And of course, Goliath was considered a giant, Goliath of Gath. And in that process, they were all looking at the size of Goliath. They were all looking at not only his stature, but obviously his reputation, his ability as a warrior. And they all feared. No one would respond to Goliath's challenge. And the point of the challenge was, let's just fight one-on-one. And that way, not as many people have to die. Whoever wins, wins the whole thing. And then here comes David, this little shepherd boy that was, I say little, but this young shepherd boy that comes in, and he's been spending time out taking care of his father's sheep, but he did not spend time taking care of his father's sheep alone. He was spending time with God. And he begins to look at this giant and says, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should take on the armies of the Lord's host, or the armies of the Lord?" In other words, referring, we're not man's army, we're God's army. God's on our side. We have covenant with God. He made reference that he's an uncircumcised Philistine, and he's referencing that he doesn't have a covenant. So David begins to magnify God. God was so much bigger than Goliath. God was so much bigger than the armies of the Philistines. And he began to say, "I'm well able to defeat this giant, because he's coming not against me, but he's coming against God." And by magnifying God and recognizing that God is on his side, he did what many sitting out there couldn't do. He defeated the giant. How many times have you been faced with a situation where the situation is taunting you and trying to make itself so big in your life that you're having trouble dealing with it? Then it's time to do what the psalmist says: "Oh, magnify the Lord with me. Let's make God big in our lives, because there is nothing too big for God. There is nothing too hard for God. And he loves you and he's on your side. So begin to practice magnifying the Lord, because the more bigger God is in your sight, your circumstances, your problems, even the vision that God has for your life doesn't have a chance, because it doesn't compare to God. Well, this is Pastor Anthony Fell with The Refuge. And again, this has been a moment of refuge. God bless.